Thanks for being here.
Thank
you got your clicker, you got your water.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. I study love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems that's ever evolved. People live for love, they kill for love, they die for love, they pine for love. Around the world, people have songs, myths, legends, poems, ballets, operas. Everywhere in the world, people love. It's an exceedingly powerful brain system, and I and my colleagues have now put over 100 people who were madly in love into a brain scanner. The first 17 were people who were happily in love. The next group were 15 people who were rejected in love, and the third group were people who were in love long term. We've actually proven that if you pick the right person, you can remain in love long term for many, many years. And so it's possible to do it, but it's difficult to do. We got to pick the right person. So why him? Why her? I had written my 4th book on romantic love. It was 2005, and it was a couple days before Christmas. I live in New York City, and I got a telephone call from Match.com, and they asked me to come in 2 days after Christmas. And that's pretty weird in New York. Nobody does any work 2 days before Christmas in New York City. And I came in and I sat down, and about 11 people filed into the room, and I couldn't figure out who was who, whether this was a think tank, whether they were other academics. As it turned out, it was the president on down. And in the middle of the morning, he asked me, "Why do you fall in love with one person rather than another?" And I said, "I don't know. I've been studying this brain circuitry for a long time. But why does that circuitry become triggered by one person rather than another?" And so by the end of the day, they became interested in talking to me more for some reason. And they asked me to start a new dating site for them. And it became a dating site called chemistry.com. And the issue was if I could come up with some sort of new thing about why you fall in love with one person rather than another. In fact, I first did not take the job because I am a scientist and I don't want to do something that isn't new. And I went home for Christmas and I began to think, why is it that we fall in love with one person rather than another? I mean, you know, psychologists know that you tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, same religious and social values, and certainly your childhood experiences are going to play a role in who you love. But you can walk into a room where everybody is from your background, same level of intelligence, same level of good looks, and you don't fall in love with all of them. There's got to be more to it. And so I began to think to myself, maybe there's basic body chemistry could play a role here. Maybe there's something that naturally pulls us towards some people rather than others. And so I began to look at the biology of behavior. There's 2 basic parts of personality. There's your nurture, everything you grew up to believe and do, and do and say and think. And then there's your nature. It's your temperament, your biology, your predispositions. And of course now with epigenetics, there's a huge play between the two. This is the most exciting thing that's happened in my life is epigenetics. But the bottom line is I wanted to know if your temperament could pull you naturally towards some people rather than others. And so I decided I would go through all of the biological literature and see what traits were linked with any biological system. And in fact, there's a great many of them. For example, if you take L-DOPA for Parkinson's disease, creativity will go up. If you take LSD, people tend to have a religious experience on LSD, so I'm told. And the reason is because you're driving up the serotonin in the brain, and that is linked with religiosity. There's actually genes in the serotonin system that are linked with religiosity. So by going through all of the academic literature, I came to see that there are 4 basic biological systems, each one of them linked with a whole constellation of personality traits. Now, if I had found 6 systems, there would be 6 here. If I had found 10, there would be 10. There are 4 basic brain systems that are linked with personality traits. There's a lot of other systems in the brain, you know, but most of them keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating, etc. They aren't linked with personality traits. So I decided what I would do is make a questionnaire that studied, examined the degree to which you express the traits linked with each one of these 4 systems, and then put it on this new dating site called chemistry.com and see who was naturally drawn to whom. And because I was working with the dating service, I had to name these people. They're terrible names, actually. I could love to dump them, but 13 million people have now taken my questionnaire, so I'm really stuck with them. People who are very expressive of the estrogen and oxytocin system. Estrogen makes oxytocin. They're very closely linked. I called the negotiator. Those who express a lot of testosterone, I call the director, the builder for serotonin, and the explorer for the dopamine system. We are all a combination of all of them. In fact, I recently gave a geneticist that I'm working with from Princeton University, Lee Silver, 100,000 people to study. 30,000 people take this questionnaire every week, so I'm sort of, swimming in data. And in fact, no 2 people took my questionnaire the same way. I'm not at all surprised at this. I've never met 2 people who I thought were alike. I'm an identical twin, and we are not alike, but the same mathematical patterns played out. People are these 4 broad, basic brain systems, the constellations of personality traits linked with each, continue to be mathematically viable. So I created the questionnaire. I'm not going to go through it. For example, I find unpredictable situations exhilarating. I figured that my high dopamine people who are novelty-seeking and risk-taking would be more agreeable to that, etc. So I created the questionnaire, I put it on chemistry.com, and then I watched who's naturally drawn to whom. So I'm going to go through, first, I'm going to go through talking about the estrogen system and the testosterone system, because this was billed as a discussion of gender differences. And then I'm going to go on to talk about these 2 other systems, and then go on to say who's naturally drawn to whom and why I think so. Okay, so I'm going to start out with the theme for the evening. It's much larger than these particular pictures, but this is the theme, and you'll get the point. It's an issue about a gender difference in intimacy. Women tend to get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel until we're face-to-face. We focus on each other. It's called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. It probably comes from millions of years of holding that baby in front of your face, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. Intimacy is talking for women. Men tend to get intimacy from side-by-side doing. As soon as he looks up, he'll look away. It's like a Sunday football team, it's a football game when they're sitting next to each other for hours, never saying really anything, and get a great deal of intimacy out of it. The problem, of course, is this. The sexes don't really understand each other. So I want to start out by talking about gender differences in the brain, and then move on to these 2 other personality styles. And remember forever, please, that we're a mix of all of them. People who are very expressive of the oxytocin and estrogen system tend to do what I call web thinking. I think of all of the gender differences, the most important and most stunning to me is how men and women think. Plato once said, when the mind is thinking, it's talking to itself. Indeed, we're always accumulating information and assembling it into patterns and relationships. We've got a committee meeting going on in our head as we're thinking. But psychologists report that when women think, they gather more data, they integrate these details faster, and they put the data into more complex patterns. When they make decisions, they weigh more variables, consider more outcomes, and see more ways to proceed. Women tend to generalize, they synthesize, they take a more holistic, contextual perspective than most men. Men tend to focus. They pay attention to one thing at a time. They compartmentalize the brain. And they tend to get rid of any kind of extraneous data and proceed in a more linear, causal, forward pathway, what I call step thinking. There's a great many examples of this. I will give you only one, and this is all I'm going to say about sex. I'll start off with another. You know, when you ask a man or a woman to describe their business, a man will view the company as a set of tasks or machines or jobs or payments. Woman tends to see an organization as an integrated, multi-layered whole comprised of patterns of relationships. Women screenwriters write much more complex narratives with multiple endings. Sometimes you can't even figure out what the ending is. Men's plots are much more linear, much more goal-oriented. Even in the bedroom, there seems to be these gender differences. You know, they begin to make love, and you know, suddenly the woman thinks about something somebody said at work or class she had or something, and she'll go straight down back to ground zero, and she's got to start again. Men just focus; they can just keep on focusing on what they're doing. Robert Frost once said, all thought is a feat of association. We now know where this gender difference in web thinking and step thinking is. This is the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain with which we assemble data and put it into parts, where we do our sequential thinking, where we do our web thinking. And indeed, they've now found one gene, and they're going to find a lot of other genes that are linked with web thinking. And this particular gene is silenced in all men and active in 50% of women. We also know that the two hemispheres are better connected in women. The factories in the back of the brain are better connected to long-distance factories in women. The male brain is more compartmentalized. It's built that way in the womb. Men are just as good at thinking as women. They think somewhat differently. In fact, there's many more male geniuses in the world, and there's many more male idiots in the world. Women have a sturdier mind. In fact, that has left women with a very special characteristic, which is their imagination. In fact, they've got there's a lot of things that stem from this. One is women are able to tolerate ambiguity better. They're better at intuition. We now know what intuition is. It comes from a Nobel laureate called Herb Simon. It's called chunking. And what chunking is as a person analyzes the stock market, learns about the history of Europe, tracks a political issue, you begin to recognize patterns. And then you see regularities in those patterns. And then you organize these patterns into blocks of knowledge known as chunking. And then with time, more patterns are chunked, and these clusters of knowledge are stored in long-term memory. And then, when you see a tiny little detail of the much larger pattern, boom, you see the entire pattern more rapidly than somebody who's doing step-by-step sequential thought. And in fact, women seem to be better at this, most likely, I think, because they have so many connections in different parts of the brain. They tend to do much more long-term planning than men do. This is one of the problems on Match.com and Chemistry.com is, people will go out for their first date, and they start in on the meal, and, the man picks up his fork wrong. And the first thing going through her mind is, oh no, he's not going to be good with the kids. He doesn't know how to pick up a fork. I mean, she's, there's already thinking way down the road. And in fact, sometimes with these women, I try to write a blog in which I say, stop thinking. Just focus on dessert and not years down the road. Women tend to be more mentally flexible. In fact, they live in a world of it depends. Where do you want to go for dinner? Well, it depends. We could go here, we could go there, we go here. Well, make up your mind. I'm making up my mind. It depends. They are into process, whereas men are much more goal-oriented. And I think that is in large part because of this web thinking. And last, because women are very imaginative. And what is imagination? But simply the ability to reach into the depths of your stored knowledge, assemble these reams of data in new ways, examine these myriad combinations, and then suppose how those combinations would play out. They're all, I think, aspects of this web thinking. There's other traits that have been studied many times and are based in biology that are grounded in brain physiology and anatomy and evolved millions of years ago. One is how men and women view power. Women tend to view power as a group of connections. Men tend to view power as rank. Women, it starts in small childhood. Little girls will play in what Deborah Tannen calls flat packs. Then, there's no leader, there's no hierarchy when you're playing dolls or jump rope. These are leaderless groups in which everybody is sensitive to one another's needs. Girls take turns. They offer suggestions. They try to appeal to reason. They try to persuade. And if there's some sort of problem and the girl starts crying, they stop the game. Somebody's feelings are at stake. Girls want harmony. Girls aren't any nicer than boys, but they live in a world of cliques, of in and out, instead of up and down. And they want to be liked. They live in a world of win-win. Men tend to live in a world of win or lose. As boys, they sort themselves in large hierarchical packs. They interrupt, they give orders, they take orders. Men are much better at giving orders than women, and much better at taking orders than women. Women don't take orders very well. They tease, they barter status, and the point is to win. Boys focus on the score. Their games have clear winners and losers. They would never stop the game because one boy was crying. They go when it's over. And you see this gender difference of men interested in rank and women interested in connections in a great many cultures around the world. It comes from what anthropologists call the male-male dominance hierarchy. You see throughout mammals, males are much busier jockeying for position than women are. As a matter of fact, one characteristic of men is what they call dominance matching. And men will match the dominance for the rank. And I really learned this the hard way one night in New York City. I was at a black tie event, and I was standing there with 4 men. And one of them was a guy from the Wall Street Journal. And what men will do, not all of them, of course, when they attack, is they expect you to attack back. And if you don't attack back, they think you're weak. So there's 2 great postural messages in the animal community. There's looking little and looking big. And so he was attacking me, and it was a nightmare, and the other 3 were watching. And all of a sudden, I turned around to this guy, and I said something to him that was vicious. That was vicious. I don't remember what it was, but it was also funny. And as the moment I said it, all of us went like this. It's called the barred tooth display. Chimpanzees do it too when you're nervous. And I said to myself, if he thinks like a woman, he'll never forgive me. If he thinks like a man, he might respect me. So after this long moment, he turned around and said, Helen! He put up his hand, and he's liked me ever since. This is one of the things that I say to people in the business community is attack back. It's hard for women to do, but it's a very good example of a profound gender difference. There's other characteristics. Women tend to be more socially skilled. They're better at reading body language, tone of voice. They're more empathetic, trusting. Trusting is a very interesting one. Anthropologists have long wondered, what was the value of trusting? If you trust the wrong person, you are up the creek. But if you trust the right person and you're good at reading social skills, it was a good article on this a couple years ago, you save a lot of metabolic energy. So it's very interesting how these traits will go together. You really can't be trusting if you can't read body language, if you can't be tolerant, if you can't see the large picture. And it's a good example of how these various traits probably evolve together as a constellation of personality traits. Anyway, women are socially smart. Little girls will smile harder at an infant girl will smile harder at a blinking light. A little infant boy will smile. An infant girl will smile harder at a human face. An infant boy will smile just as hard at a blinking light. Girls pay more attention to faces, and everywhere in the world, women are the nurturers of the sick, of the elderly, and children. The last basic trait, a real gender difference is in verbal skills. Mark Twain once said, the difference between one word, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. And indeed, that's exactly the truth. At basic articulation, women don't have any better vocabulary than men do, but they call it up fast. You can watch this on television anywhere in the world, really. They've got wonderful verbal skills. Last but not least, women seek harmony. They don't hit you in the face. They'll stab you in the back, but they're not going to hit you in the face. They seek harmony. They're emotionally expressive, by and large, much more so than men, and they have what I call diplomatic intelligence. A good example is Oprah Winfrey. This is one quote: "The only time I have ever made a bad decision is when I didn't follow my instincts." Very few men, I think, would say that. An educator, emotionally expressive, really fine verbal skills, etc. A good example of a very high estrogen individual. Bill Clinton, I think, is another high estrogen individual. You know, you can be high on estrogen and testosterone, low on one, low on the other, etc. They're not always necessarily opposed. You know, people have often said, well, you know, when are we going to have our first woman president? I think we've had our first woman president. His book, what'd somebody say? Oh, well. I think it's important to have a synthesizing mind. I read that in his book, which was something like 963 pages. Whole world knows he can't stop talking. That's a highly estrogen-related skill. He's the one that cried at their daughter's wedding, not his wife. And everybody knows he feels your pain. He also has got a lot of the traits of high estrogen. You'll see in another slide coming up. But the very round face, the soft face, the lack of heavy brow ridges is all built. The shorter forehead is all built by estrogen. So, testosterone, the second of these four broad styles of thinking and behaving. These people tend to be analytical. They're called in academia rule-based systems. It's mechanics, music, computers, engineering, math, etc. Men, little boys, an infant boy is better at tracking a blinking light across a TV screen. They excel at predicting the path of a moving object. Little boys like toys and cars and blocks and trains, things that they can build and move. They pack the video arcades, whereas women don't. They can predict much better the patterns in a paper folding test. And as testosterone piles into the brain with teenage, boys tend to excel at geometry, mechanical drawing, science, math, and engineering. 1 million years ago, these men used these spatial skills to track animals. If you didn't, you know, if you couldn't find your way back home 1 million years ago, you were hardly going to have children and pass on your DNA. So it was certainly selected for. And of course today, it's many more men who design our cell phones and our computers and our bridges and our hospitals. There's other traits that men have: inventive, exacting, irreverent. On my chemistry.com site, they're the least religious, rank-oriented, competitive, dominance matching, emotionally contained. It's a very high testosterone trait. A perfect example for me was a girlfriend some time ago who said to her husband, she said, "You know, sweetie, you haven't said you loved me in a month." And he said to her, he said, "Well, I said that last month and nothing's changed." I said, emotionally contained, decisive, bold. These are the ones that scream, get to the point, and direct. Deep focus, not a contextual focus, but a deep, more narrow focus. Steve Jobs is a perfect example. You can see in the face that very strong jaw, the high zygomatic arch here, and the heavy brow ridges and the high forehead are all built by testosterone. And sure enough,
Svengali of the digital world, fiercely demanding, brutally honest. Honesty is part of, seems to be part of the testosterone. Exacting, impatient, self-disciplined, just, you know, had nothing to do with authority. Very good example of a high testosterone man. A good example of a high testosterone woman, I think, is Hillary Clinton. When asked why why she was attracted to Bill, she said, "He wasn't afraid of me." And you can see now the various different traits of the testosterone and the estrogen system. How different these, the narrow focus, the contextual, decisive, forthright, as opposed to indirect, tender-hearted, tough-minded, etc. You wonder what kind of relationship these people are going to have, or whether they will even be attracted to each other. So I'm going to tell you our results after going through the four broad styles of thinking and behaving, but my guess is that these are the ones that fall madly in love, trigger this brain circuitry for romantic love, but frankly never really understand who it is that they've been married to for about 30 years. So there's other types. Going back to the estrogen and testosterone, these others. In these 13 million people in 40 countries who've taken this questionnaire, we saw a real gender difference. Many more women expressed the estrogen system, and many more men expressed the testosterone system. But when the expression of the serotonin and the dopamine system seemed to have no gender difference. I particularly like that because a lot of people don't think that women are explorers. They're very much explorers, but I'll go into that. So anyway, we're all a combination of all of them. As I said, I'm now working to really refine. I mean, let's say you're high on estrogen, green. I call it tree hugger green. But you could be high on part of it, like being very imaginative, but not high on another part of it, being very empathetic. And so I'm building now a way to have a personality signature, a little like a fingerprint, so that you can see the full details of which parts of each of these systems you most express. So the third of the four types are those expressive of the serotonin system. They observe social norms. They follow the rules. They enjoy familiarity. They like to go to the same place on Saturday night and see the same people. They're not scared. They're not scared, but they're cautious. They're just cautious. They're calm, self-controlled. This is why you take Prozac or Paxil that drives up the serotonin system. It makes you calmer, tend to be stoic and frugal. They're also somewhat controlling. They like plans, schedules, routines. They're orderly. They like order. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who, about 10 years ago, every year, he and his wife go to an accountant. And about 10 years ago, they were all talking, the three of them, and he leaned on the accountant's desk, and by just chance, he moved the guy's pencil sharpener. And immediately the guy moved it back. And so now every single year that he goes back, he leans on this guy's desk and moves the pencil sharpener, and every year the guy moves it back. They like plans, schedules, and routines, concrete, literal thinking. I made a terrible mistake myself in Washington, state of Washington. I was talking about these various styles of thinking and behaving with a journalist. My book on this had just come out, and she didn't like me. I could tell she didn't like me. And when you get nervous, you become more of who you are. And I became more and more flamboyant, trying to win her over. And she disliked me more and more and more. And the following day, I was right. I saw what she wrote in the newspaper, and I had gotten that right. But what I should have done, instead of turned around to her and showered her with details, the Cronbach's alpha, eigenanalysis, the nucleus accumbens. I should have showered her with details, and I think I could have won her over. They tend to be good with, very good with numbers, creative, more close friends. You take Prozac or Paxil or any of these SSRIs, you're going to acquire more close friends. They want to belong. They respect authority. They follow the rules. They tend to be more religious. and they tend to be loyal. Of all of the questions in the questionnaire, that one, in many respects, mathematically was the most dramatic. The question was something like, and I don't quite remember what it is, but it was something like, would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? Now, we all want loyal friends, and we all want interesting friends. But these people cannot tolerate unloyal friends. And the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's a dramatic mathematical difference linked somehow with the serotonin system. I think Meg Whitman is a very good example. I've gotten really interested in biography, and within the first 25 pages of her autobiography, she used that word values more than 50 times. Everywhere, the right thing to do, values, frugal, etc. Very expressive of the serotonin system. Another example is Mitt Romney. Orderly. This guy's orderly. His barber, was a wonderful article in the New York Times about his barber and the way he cuts his hair. Detail-oriented, frugal. Another article in the New York Times said that he used to wash his shirts in the sink and iron them himself when he traveled. Can't imagine he's doing that still, but bottom line is a tremendous sense of duty, follows the rules, really respects authority, very expressive, I think, of the serotonin system. And the testosterone system, very has the face built by high testosterone. It's a good example of testosterone and serotonin. The fourth of the four broad styles of thinking and behaving are dopamine and its close relative norepinephrine. These people are sensation seekers. That's the academic term, sensation seeking. They're the most curious. They're the most likely to have gotten a college education. They make the most money, and they lose the most money. They have a tremendous number of interests. They're explorers, physical and mental. It's not just people who are jumping off mountains. It's people who might like the theater and the opera and read a lot of books and almost never leave the house, but in fact are tremendously curious about things. Optimistic, enthusiastic, independent, self-reliant, impulsive. These are the ones that walk into the bar and impulsively buy everybody a drink. Mental flexibility, very open-minded. In fact, they can be really Machiavellian. And last but most important, I don't know if you can see that, is idea generation. I think probably this is one of the reasons that people will take Ritalin or Adderall for exams. I'm not advocating it, but it'll drive up the dopamine system and it'll give this focus and idea generation. Richard Branson's a perfect example. I've always thought rules were made to be broken. Now, this is a high dopamine guy. I've always had an urge to live life to its fullest. Very much of the high dopamine style. And in fact, I would guess that almost all of our entertainers are the high dopamine type. She has a tattoo of a window on her arm. Let me out. Let me be free. A very, I think, expressive of the dopamine system. So, having done all this, Match.com was interested in these personality types, but what they wanted to know was why him, why her, why you're drawn to one person rather than another. So I did this study with 40,000 people over and over. It's all just mathematical numbers. I never look at somebody's name or where they come from or their photograph. That's not allowed in the company. But you can watch on chemistry.com. People take the questionnaire, and then I watch who they click to go out with. And indeed, I had a hypothesis that opposites attract. That high dopamine, the high novelty-seeking, risk-taking, would go for the stability of the serotonin type, and vice versa, and that the high testosterone, tough-minded, would need the empathy and the verbal skills of the high estrogen type. That opposites would attract. I was half right and half wrong. As it turns out, high dopamine wants high dopamine. They want somebody who, you come home at 7:30 at night and you say, let's go to the opera, or let's go nude swimming in Central Park, let's go to the, and you want somebody who's going to go with you and do it. Indeed, they're drawn to people like themselves. The same thing with the traditional, conventional builder, the high serotonin type. They're drawn to people like themselves. They want somebody who's equally conventional, traditional, follows the rules, respects authority, and plays the way they play. In that case, similarity attracts. The opposite attracts when it's male and female. The high testosterone goes for high estrogen, and high estrogen goes for high testosterone. And I think a very good example is Hillary and Bill Clinton. And I choose that example largely because it's Bill that's expressing the high estrogen traits and Hillary that is expressing the high testosterone traits. So in this case, opposites attract. It's amazing how many psychologists are so convinced that similarity attracts, and others are so convinced that opposites attract. If you were to come to my house, you would see 2 piles of academic papers. Those papers absolutely, utterly convinced that similarity attracts and the others that opposites attract. But they haven't looked at the full range of personality traits and taken a clearer look at the global perspective. So, on to a couple things, and then I will finish. The future. I am really interested in personality. I think that we can, in fact, I would like it if everybody here took the personality questionnaire and then we matched college roommates, even professors and students. My guess is that people are going to learn in certain ways and will learn better from certain kinds of professors. I would like to see a corporate board put together not only by gender diversity, but by intellectual diversity. You know, you can hire somebody who's a different gender, but they still may think exactly the way you think. And so I'm sort of interested in this intellectual diversity. But this is the most important slide probably of my life so far. There's one other. But what we've done is we have now had 45 people take my questionnaire and then put them into a brain scanner to find out what is going on in the brain of these people. Is there biology to what I'm saying there's biology to? And sure enough, people who are very expressive, who score very high on my dopamine questionnaire show more activity in the whole pathway of the dopamine system. Those who were more traditional on my questionnaire show more activity in a brain region linked with social norm conformity. Those expressive of the testosterone system show more activity in a brain region linked with analytical thinking, and those expressive of the on my questionnaire of the estrogen system show more activity in the mirror neurons, brain region linked with empathy. So we're beginning to map the biology of personality. We are then going to go on to study some of the genetics of it. These are 64 genes that I hope that we're going to be able to study and assemble some of the real genetics of personality. So I'm going to conclude with a couple things. For millions of years, we lived in little hunting and gathering groups. Anthropologists think that there were probably about 25 individuals to a little band. They also think that about 10 or 12 of these individuals were adolescents and children. That leaves about 10 or 12 grown-ups. They're all walking over a hill, and they suddenly see some mushrooms. You can't have all explorers saying, let's try the mushrooms. You got to have some traditional builders that say, we've never tried these mushrooms. It's not in our tradition to try these mushrooms. We need some of the directors, the high testosterone type, who say, well, let's have an experiment. Let's feed the mushrooms to the dog, see what happens. And you need some of the negotiator type, the high estrogen type, who say, let's sit down and pool our data about these mushrooms and figure this out. The bottom line is, we were really built to put our heads together. I think men and women are like 2 feet. They need each other to get ahead. And in fact, I've written a lot of books about where we're going as a society. I think we're moving towards what I would call a collaborative society, in which we are coming to see and value the skills, the aptitudes of both men and women. In many respects, we're moving forward to the kinds of culture that we had 1 million years ago. 1 million years ago, women were just about as powerful as men. They commuted to work together, their fruits and vegetables. They came home with 60 to 80% of the meal. The double income family was the rule, and women expressed their sexuality, and they were socially powerful and just about as economically powerful as men. In many respects, we're moving forward to what I call a collaborative society in which both men and women are valued. So I think I will part with this concept. We are taught, I think, from childhood, the golden rule, to treat others as you want to be treated. And in fact, the platinum rule, you need to treat others as they need to be treated. And then you'll win. Thank you.
What we did is we had people tweet and post on Facebook all different kinds of questions during your talk, and so here they come. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question number 1 is, do you believe in love at first sight?
I not only believe in love at first sight, but I can explain it.
Do it.
You know, this is a brain system that we have been able to track. It is way below the cortex. It's way below the thinking parts of the brain. It's way below the emotional parts of the brain. It's part of primitive brain regions linked with drive, with wanting, with craving, with focus, with energy, with motivation. And that brain system can be triggered in an instant. This is the wanting system. You know, I study poetry because I think it's a great artifact. A lot of anthropologists will study all kinds of different artifacts, but poetry, I think, is a great artifact of the human mind. And I think the best description of love was written by Plato in the Symposium, in which he said, "The God of love lives in a state of need." It is a need, it's a want, it's a homeostatic imbalance, and it can be triggered instantly.
Thank you.
Men are more, experience it much more than women do.
Hold on. Wait, what? So are you saying that men are more likely to experience love at first sight than women?
Yes, I've got a great deal of data. For 3 years in a row, Match.com and I have done what they call, a national survey called Singles in America. I just finished doing it. And in that survey, we didn't survey the Match.com population. We surveyed it was based on the U.S. Census. So we had the right number of blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos, gay, straight, rural, suburban, urban, every age group, et cetera. And I asked a lot of questions year after year. And one of the questions of, do you believe in love at first sight? Men, much more than women, about 60%. Have you ever had the experience of love at first sight? Men, much more than women. Men are more visual than women. For good Darwinian reasons. You know, they had to look at that woman and size her up, you know, to see if she could bear them healthy babies. So they respond instantly. That's why we spend our lives trying to look good, because it trigger that brain system in the boy.
Okay. One of the questions is, there are a lot of different dating sites that are out there, Match.com, Chemistry.com, OkCupid, different things like that. I've heard these things exist. What are the differences among the different sites? It seems like you were trying to do something very different when you created this. Is that really kind of a repudiation of some of these other sites? Are they less likely to be effective? What do you think about it?
Well, I think that mankind has been falling in love for a long, long time without any dating sites. So, you know, but I think in our modern age, where we're no longer marrying the girl we met in high school, we're no longer marrying the boy we went out with in college, we're not even marrying in our early 20s, and with a very high divorce rate, a lot of people are back out on the marriage market, you know, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And by then, they're certainly not going to stand in a bar and have the perfect person walk by. So I honestly think that these dating services, all of them, play a very important role in a society where, you know, by the time you're in your 30s or 40s, you know everybody at work, you know everybody in your social circle. How are you going to meet people? So I think that if every single one of these dating services were to fall into the Atlantic Ocean tomorrow, they would be reinvented. I think it's part of our modern world. But you asked a different question about chemistry.com, and it is a different site. And the reason it's a different site, when Match.com, well, the difference between Match and chemistry is on Match.com, you do the shopping yourself. You go out there and you thumb through things, and they try to give you some people also, but basically you thumb through and look at yourself. Whereas on chemistry.com, we give you 5 people a day. And so it's all anonymous. Nobody can thumb through looking at everybody. But all of that said, what's important about my questionnaire, it seems a little egotistical, but it's the only one in humankind that is based basically on biology. There's a lot of good questionnaires out there, but they start with psychology. They start with, they come out of linguistics actually, and they will assume that, okay, let's study neuroticism, let's study being open, let's study conscientiousness, and they study them from the psychological. Whereas I started with the biology, and I built the questionnaire not out of linguistic or psychological processes, but out of biology. And so when I go back to the biology to study it, it's falsifiable. I can prove it, that it's measuring what it's measuring. There's no other questionnaire out there that can prove that it's actually measuring what it's measuring. Now, whether that's going to help people fall in love, I don't know. But I think the big issue that I want is just, if I get it so that you can kiss fewer frogs on your way to paradise, that works for me.
Well, you know, what I hear you saying is that you're beginning to provide a different kind of language for the kinds of conversations that people have about love all the time that are so unsatisfying. You know, where people, you see it in the movies all the time, you know, sort of like, the heart wants what the heart wants. I don't know why, you know, why this faded, you know, those sort of things. You're sort of saying, well, yeah, maybe we can figure out why. Maybe there's some physiological elements that we can look at. Well, you mentioned the divorce rate. Do you have, one of the questions here is, do you have an opinion about why the divorce rate is so high these days? Do you think about that?
I've studied divorce for many years. I wrote a book about it. I've looked at divorce in 58 societies through the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations. There's many, many reasons for divorce. Many, many reasons. But I wanted to know, there's cultural reasons, there's social reasons, there's psychological reasons, there's economic reasons, there's reasons of the community, there's many, many, many reasons. But I wanted to know if there were any biological reasons. So I looked at the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations, and I found around the world, if you're going to divorce, you tend to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage. At first I thought, oh, rats, I hoped it was 7, you know, so, but it was 4. And so then I looked at pair bonding in birds and mammals, and as it turns out, take a robin in the park. A robin pairs up with another robin in the spring, and they stick together until the babies fly away. They have to stick together. If one is sitting on that egg, it'll starve to death. So monogamy evolves when the female cannot raise her babies by herself. But in birds and mammals, the pair bond breaks up. After the baby robins fly away, the pair bond breaks up. So it began to occur to me, in hunting and gathering societies, women tend to bear their children every 4 years. And maybe this human atavism, this human habit of serial monogamy, a series of pair bond relationships, is an ancient practice that evolved millions of years ago to stay together at least long enough to raise the children through infancy. Now, in a hunting and gathering society, a child by age 4 or 5 is not equipped to feed itself, but they end up joining multi-age play groups, so they can now be cared for by a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old and aunts and uncles and cousins. So for millions of years, it may even have been adaptive to break up, so you could then form a new pair bond with somebody else and create more genetic variety in your young, leaving the human animal with a tremendous desire to fall in love, form a pair bond, and stay together at least long enough to raise the child through infancy, a tendency to break up, tendency to be adulterous on the side, that's a different issue, and pair again. And when you look at hunting and gathering societies, they tend to have A woman tends to have 2 or 3 husbands during the course of her life. Serial monogamy. And the reason is, I've looked in 20 cultures on this, everywhere in the world where women are economically powerful, they can leave bad marriages in order to make better ones. People don't walk out of good marriages, they walk out of bad marriages. And in fact, what we're looking at now is a society, I think, in which women have the economic power and to leave a bad marriage, and men no longer have to abandon a woman who's totally dependent on him, leaving us to leave a bad marriages in order to make better ones. And in this Singles in America study, we found one piece of data that fascinated me this year. We studied not only 5,000 singles, but we studied 1,000 married people. And I asked the married people, would you remarry the same person? 80% said yes. And so what I think is going on is with women's rising economic power, growing economic equality between the sexes, later marriage, which actually creates stability in relationships, people can leave unhappy marriages for better ones. And in fact, today, 80% of people are happy in their marriage.
This is a really different kind of question, but one that I think a lot of people wonder about. Do you think it's possible for a person to love 2 people at the same time? Have you ever thought about that in your work?
I think, yes. First of all, let's define love. I think that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, craving for sexual gratification. The second is romantic love, the elation, giddiness, euphoria, possessiveness, obsessive thinking, craving, motivation to win this person.
Go on.
And I could go on all night.
I like that.
And the third brain system is attachment, that sense of calm and security you can feel with a long-term partner. I think the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners. You can have sex with somebody you're not in love with. I think romantic love evolved to enable you to focus your mating energy on just one at a time. And I think this third brain system of attachment evolved to enable you to tolerate this human being at least long enough to raise a child together as a team. And so can you love 2 people at the same time? You can clearly be attached to 2 people at the same time. You can clearly have sex with 2, 3, whatever it is, number of people at a time. I do not think that you can be madly in love with 2 people at the same time, because it is a human brain system that is focused. Central to it is that it's focused on one person rather than another. And when you take a look at world poetry, I think it's best summed up by an Indian poet called Kabir, and he basically said, the lane of love is narrow, there's room for only one. So my guess is that when somebody says they're in love with 2 people, they're not in love with either. Or it's just the beginning of the relationship. They love one for a while, then another for a while, then another for a while, and then something happens, times change, and then all that focus is on one.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think breaking it into 3 systems, I think, really provides a different way to think about it. I mean, it could be that you're feeling attachment and commitment, but you're not feeling romantic love. So you're saying the romantic love piece is so obsessive and kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting about what you just said? You know, you can lie in bed at night and feel deep attachment to one person, and then swing into feelings of wild romantic love for somebody else, and then swing into feelings of sexual desire when you read a book or something. So it's as if there's a committee meeting going on in your head, you know, as these things swing. And that's one of the problems of adultery. You feel deep attachment to one person and not madly in love with another. We're not a stable animal.
Well, I was going to say we don't have a sufficiently nuanced vocabulary for thinking about love. Because if we think it's all those things at once, and there's in fact that conversation going on, that might be a problem. So one question is, have you studied biological attraction in same-sex couples? Is that on your agenda, or is it something chemistry.com is interested in?
Chemistry.com is very interested in it, and the reason they're interested in it is because, as I've told them, and they agree with me, it doesn't make any difference. I wanted to start putting same-sex, gays and lesbians into my brain scanner when we were first beginning. But because we were the first in the world to scan the brains of people, we had to stick to some of the basic rules. And because we would get hammered by academics. But since then, a guy called Semir Zeki in London has put lesbians, gays, and heterosexuals into the brain scanner, doing pretty much what we're doing, and they found exactly the same thing. So the brain system is like the fear system. You can be scared at any age. You can be scared if you're gay or straight. You can be scared under any circumstances. In the same way, you can be in love. The feeling of being in love is a standard feeling for the human animal. Who you fall in love with, that will vary. But how you feel when you love will be the same whether you're gay or straight.
Fascinating, fascinating. Well, I want to ask you the kind of question that I think most academic researchers would ask about this, which is, now that you're reaching a wider audience, I kind of want to say, how have you been misunderstood? Because it seems to me that one of the risks of the kind of presentation you just gave is that someone could say, well, you're using biology to sort of essentialize men are this way, women are this way. And I know by putting Bill Clinton up there, you're kind of working against that. So is that a problem for you? Do you find that people try to take the work and use it in ways that maybe ignore some of the nuances of what you're trying to put forward? How are you dealing with that?
I don't deal with it very well. It hurts my feelings because they haven't listened. I don't know how many times I said, we're all a combination of all of them. No two people are alike. These broad styles of thinking, and in every one of my cases, I did a man and a woman. But people are going to listen to what they listen to. There's two things that I do. One thing I do is I don't read anything about me. I've never Googled myself. I've almost never watched one of my own speeches. I'll read something if it's in the New York Times because I got to do that, or The Economist. But other than that, I don't read it. I don't think I'd be able to go on doing what I do if I were to be constantly, feeling so misunderstood. I just go on with my work.
Okay, fantastic. Well, listen, I really want to thank you, and thank you very much, the students, the community members. Dr. Fisher's going to be right at the top of the stairs signing some books if you'd like to purchase a book and do that. See you at the next talk. Lovely to see you all tonight.
Yes.